Welcome to Innovation in Government, presented by Carasoft. This program's from West 2025. AFCEA International and the U.S. Naval Institute host West each year at the San Diego Convention Center. I'm your host, Francis Rose. The theme of this year's event is "The Future is Now. Are we advancing operational capabilities that pace the threat?" Government and industry leaders at West say speed of everything is the biggest ingredient to answering that question. And speed is especially important to how sea service leaders at West want to use data and want to drive digital transformation. Over the next hour, you'll meet leaders from the Navy, the Office of the DoD Chief Information Officer, and industry leaders that are supporting the federal government's sea service community. First, a look at connecting technology to mission. Rob Pickle is sales director at Carasoft. He says one of the themes of West for him is using technology for fleet preparedness.
And knowing that all eyes are on 2027 and making sure that the Navy and Marine Corps and the fleet in general is prepared as possible for conflict with China over Taiwan. And so there's an enormous amount of technology and effort to making sure that the DoD is prepared as possible for this. And you know, there's just some critical timing to this, right? I mean, we're in FY25 right now, and FY26 is when, our Department of Defense is really going to need to make a lot of these executable actions, right? And so, at this show, there's just an incredible amount of momentum and great conversations being had about what industry can do to support the DoD and how the DoD can learn from industry. And frankly, Francis, that's one of the greatest things about West over the years is this encouraging of really constructive dialogue and feedback between industry and government.
What do you think the biggest thing is that industry can do for that readiness that you just talked about? And what's the biggest thing that the department can do to help its industry partners understand that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about education. There's really been some great sessions, throughout this week. The systems integrator community, the reseller community, everyone has, real value that they can provide from an information sharing perspective. There's a number of vendors at this show that are specializing in different things like cybersecurity, DevSecOps, again, AI, machine learning, and certain reseller partners, certain system integrator partners are the right delivery partners for certain customers. So it's all about kind of creating the right relationships so that the right people are talking to each other. I mean, right here in this room and elsewhere, there are just an incredible number of industry partners have a lot of technology that can really enable and make the Navy succeed. And it's just all about getting them together and learning what we can do together.
And that's kind of where I wanted to go next. What's the next step for when these relationships form at a place like this? What's the next step to maximize the success of that relationship into solving a problem or problem set for a warfighter or a group of warfighters?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's all about high velocity and speed, right? I mean, I just got done with a meeting with the DoD ESI program office. And our charter is all about how do we deliver the right technology at speed to our warfighter, right? And so a number of the technology partners here are on contracts like DoD ESI or DLA, TLS, the Special Operations Equipment Vehicle. And so my kind of charter to us and to our to the reseller community, the systems integrator partners, how can we work together as a cohesive unit to deliver once our government customers who are here are learning all kinds of great things about the technology that industry has to offer. Can the industry partners, to your point, take that to the next level to deliver an integrated solution at speed to the customer, right? How can we deliver the right kind of contract vehicle, access to those partners? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, with FY26 being a critical period of time, the government is looking to move at speed, and we as industry need to take that action to work together as a cohesive unit to deliver software and hardware solutions at scale.
Quick final thought, we have less than a minute left. That speed that you've mentioned a couple of times, every person that I talk to here on the military side is talking about speed. How is industry poised to help them realize that desire for speed?
Well, there's been a real track record of industry being able to move quickly, kind of at the end of fiscal year moments, right? It's all about alignment to me, right? So it's making sure that the right reseller community and systems integrator community are aligned in a way to go to market to succeed with those customers. So I think it's all about understanding the nuances of that customer and what their requirement is, because every contracting specialist out there, every program manager that's out there is comfortable with moving things in a certain way with contracts and things that they're used to. So it's kind of our job to help them navigate those challenges and get to that end result as quickly as possible, because every person has unique experiences with the contracts they've used and the programs that they use, and we just need to help them navigate that.
Rob Pickle of Carahsoft. Paying for technology or any line item on a budget has been more difficult than you'd think, thanks to budget uncertainty from Capitol Hill. Vice Admiral Brad Skillman, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Integration of Capabilities and Resources, tells me a lack of certainty in funding has a huge impact on getting the job done.
And we've been in, CRs for most of the last 20 years. And, we provide that information to the Hill and they understand it. But, the process often doesn't afford them to approve it on time. What we're seeing this year with a 6-month CR, should end on the 14th of March, is a large misalignment in funds. So as a reference, the Navy has a little over $200 billion. I have about $25 billion of that inside procurement accounts that are misaligned. So that's new starts that can't start. That's programs that have changes in numbers that either went down or up. They're in the wrong places. So the money's just in the wrong place. Most importantly, there is a severe impact to our personnel based on a CR. So when the National Defense Authorization Act is signed, it actually authorizes pay raises. And so that's a 4.8% pay raise starting January 1st. I have to pay that regardless of appropriation. So it has to come from somewhere, and it comes from the military personnel account. And when it comes from that account, that means that things that you would do normally in the first and second quarter of FY25, you can't do. So you would slow down your permanent change of station moves. You would reduce or defer your bonuses to the sailors. So it's actually very disruptive to them. Secondarily, if the CR gets extended longer, which is possible right now, the future is uncertain. In past 1 April, when the junior enlisted pay raise happens for E1 to E4, which is 14%, that would also have to be paid out of existing funds. So you can see that it's quite disruptive. Other thing that's disruptive, and I use the example of IT software modernization and building, right? So how they do that in an agile process is they do sprints. Well, you can't start those sprints until you receive your money for them. Well, if you don't receive your money until May, then you haven't started the ones that were supposed to be done for the last 8 months. So you're behind. And you can't, even though you could spend the money, you don't actually get the work accomplished that you had planned to get during that year. And so you're behind.
That's right.
And so CRs are a negative, not only for ourselves, but for industry. It's that steady, consistent work makes us go better and faster. And we have a lot to do. So
it's interesting that you mentioned going faster too, because every person that I've talked to at this conference, whether it's industry, whether it's uniformed personnel like yourself, civilian personnel, is talking about speed, the need for speed. We have to go faster. We have to go faster, pacing threat as laid out by the CNO. And yet you're in this situation that you just described that's impacting that ability.
It is. So in the CNO's NAV Plan 2024, she really highlights like 2 time epics. Essentially, the here and now is to be ready to deter any Chinese aggression in 2027, and 2, building enduring advantage for the future. So between now and 2027, we don't have a lot of flexibility in our funds anyway. So you are really looking at, and the urgency that you're hearing is really based on the policies, the processes, understanding our business as well as we possibly can to eliminate any waste that there might be. In other words, you've given a deadline. So I think we all know what a deadline means. I know you operate under one all the time. You get the work done if you have a deadline. So she's given us a deadline. So that means faster and with urgency. That's good. It's not necessarily all of a money issue. Now, the building a long-term enduring advantage is definitely a money issue, and you have to do proper procurements of the proper systems so that we stay the world's greatest Navy into the 2030s and beyond.
Who are your greatest partners in ensuring that whatever you can do within the limitations that you've described, you're able to do within the Navy itself?
Oh, I think that right now we have really the best alignment I have ever seen in my naval career among not only the Echelon 1 OpNav staff, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations that I work with under the CNO, but also with the fleets themselves. So I've worked really hard over the last 4.5 years in my roles as working programming and now being the N8, is to be very transparent with the fleet. And not only that, is take their recommendations and act upon them, right? So a lot of trust is built up and we're all aligned. And being aligned means that we can move faster than what we could in the past. And there's not the animosity that maybe you have different rice bowls.
Yes.
So that's real positive in how we're progressing right now. That's going to allow us to break down some of these really hard, hairy problems into chewable chunks and be able to actually affect the change we need by 2027.
We have about 30 seconds left, Admiral. What do you advise the sailors and Marines that are working these issues a couple of levels down, especially when it comes to innovation, technology, and so on, to do within the constraints that we've discussed?
I think that even though we have constraints, we can move money around inside of an execution year, even under a CR to some extent. I can't do new starts, right? But if I wanted to do an experiment, I can do an experiment. We can put some money against that to be able to do that so we can move faster. So don't struggle in silence. Tell somebody what you're thinking, move that up the chain. Let us break down the barriers. And that's really the theme that CNO has. Let the 4 stars break down the barriers, and I'll break down the barriers before they get to her. And that's my plan.
Vice Admiral Brad Skillman. I mentioned at the beginning of the program that military leaders say speed is an important part of their success in lots of different areas. More and more military leaders say they're open to using commercial solutions off the shelf instead of asking for customization. Bree Frost is Director of Cybersecurity and IT Ops Curriculum at Pluralsight. She says agility is one of the greatest lessons the public sector can learn from the commercial world.
Typically, I think we can all agree there's a little bit more red tape, there's a little bit more steps, there's a little bit more process-driven decisions that happen. And so we can say, hey, we've made these mistakes. We've made this mistakes in implementation, or this kind of tech stack really works really well for your objectives. And I think I would love to see a better partnership between public sector and private sector really working together to make a more seamless transition to new technologies, especially I can all see the big rise of AI and how that has been implemented. I think there's less risk innovating and doing more implementation into the private sector firms than public sector. So we can use that and partner together.
What would help you in industry if the department, if the services would do that, fill in the blank, to be able to drive that speed?
Yeah, I think having kind of public sector objectives and missions, we're all of us in cybersecurity are mission focused, right? I always use the term, our whole goal, our whole mission, no matter what you do in security, is to be better than the adversaries. We all want to fight the bad guys. And I think that comes so much more into fruition from public sector and government missions. And so to be able to kind of get that oomph behind it and get that over the hurdle of yes, we all want to reduce business risk. We all want to reduce spend for cost of breaches, but having that really important mission of benefiting that partnership between private and public sector, I think not just helps drive business decisions, but helps us as individuals, as security professionals, really push that innovation and that research forward.
What are the questions that Sea Service people are bringing you at a show like this? And what maybe are they not asking you that they should be asking you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think right now, as I mentioned, everyone top of mind is AI. AI. How do we implement this? What should we be considering? What are the security risks? And I always use the term, it reminds me back in 2018, 2019, and everyone's zero trust.
Yeah.
Zero trust, and no one could actually really define what zero trust meant. Or we're seeing a lot of vendor products utilize fear to sell products, right? So they're like, oh, we have a one-stop shop button push for zero trust. And now that we're 5, 6, 7 years into zero trust implementation, we know that's not quite how it works. And I'm seeing a lot of that reminiscent from AI threat detection, AI this, AI that, AI-powered threats, AI-powered attacks. AI is just a tool. Before there were SIEMs, before there was EDR, before there was all of these vendor products, we still did security analysis. All those tools just made us better and made us more efficient. AI is just a tool that's going to make us better, make us more efficient. I think there's a lot of fear being utilized right now to sell one-stop shop solutions and button pushing solutions that I don't think is going to be utilized 2 to 3 years in the future. Where I think we should be asking the questions from public sector agencies is, where can this help us become more efficient in our mission and in our directives and in our objectives? Not just trying to be the forefront of the name of the game and use the newest tool and the newest LLM.
Yeah.
I think it's going to make all of us kind of transition as a whole to be just better considerate of how we're going to be utilizing that in our every day and ingest into the tools that we already use.
How do you advise people to cut through that kind of fear hype and determine whether something is going to add value to what they're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I come from a security research background, and we do a lot of adversary emulation and show how adversaries are changing their tactics and techniques based on new technologies. And so what I love to show is we do a lot of lessons learned from new breaches, and I'm like, these guys are still using the same PowerShell scripts that they used 10 years ago. Their campaigns and their attacks are more efficient and they're able to scale quickly, but the tactics and techniques are the same. If you at a agency level or even private enterprise level have your security controls in place and you test them regularly and you emulate what the attackers are doing, nothing that AI is going to do is going to change that. It doesn't change the techniques. It doesn't change the tactics. They're still getting in via user click or even supply chain now is kind of the big aspect for kind of security access and initial access. They're still, spreading throughout the network. Like, none of that has drastically changed. It's the same thing that they were doing 10 years ago. They now just are able to do it with more efficiency.
Bree Frost of Pluralsight. Sea Service leaders at West this year and any other time they speak in public are careful to credit industry as important partners in fulfilling their missions. And they speak often about what makes a good industry partner. Chris Betts is Chief Technology Officer for Federal at AFCEA. He says industry partners should be careful how they partner with government.
A lot of sales teams are very salesy. You can't be that in this industry. And so I think the important relationship to have is to not only be a trusted advisor, but a strategic partner, right? Where you're driving value into the business, you're helping leadership align to whatever their desired business outcomes are, because then you have more credibility, right? You don't want to sell a customer a product that ultimately becomes shelfware and is delivering very little to no value. And so, we try to mitigate that by being a trusted advisor and a strategic partner.
What do they demand of you, your government partners, to become that trusted partner? And what do they maybe not demand of you, but you try to deliver it anyway in order to build that relationship the way that you just described?
Yeah, I think accountability on both sides, right? So if you've got a sales team or an organization that's coming into leadership and promising to, drive out costs or do X, Y, and Z, have some accountability on both sides, because it's not just you selling a thing to, hit quota or whatever you're trying to do for yourself. Mm-hmm. But having accountability and showing the path of how to drive out, the dollars or enable whatever the desired business outcome is.
From a strategy perspective, what are the strategies that you're seeing these sea services undertake in order to have success in their digital transformations?
Yeah, and I don't know if I've necessarily seen them undertake it, but I think what they're striving for is, you've got 30 years of how you've done IT business, And so when you hear these new initiatives like, zero trust architectures or being able to do cross-domain, multi-layer security type of capabilities, they've got to rationalize 30 years of history, right? And so, for example, with like a ZTA framework, you've got to rationalize 30 years of security policy and framework. And sometimes it's more than one. We've seen customers have up to 30. You've got to rationalize those things before you can implement the new modern thing that transforms the business. So I think a lot of people understand that, but they're having a hard time doing that. Yeah.
What's the reason for that? Why is it hard to do when you can it sounds like they see it in front of them.
They do.
And have a hard time actually taking the action.
Yeah, and I think they even understand the problem because you hear it at these conferences all over the globe, is that I think you have a lot of turnover in a lot of these key leadership positions. So they set out to do a really great thing. They get to a certain point and then they move on to their next endeavor. And then a new person comes in, maybe the handoff doesn't necessarily take place, or they want to put their own rubber stamp. And sometimes it reboots. So it's, and then there's, within federal government, there's a lot of just red tape and bureaucracy that I think, working together, we can kind of figure those things out. And then I think we in industry could do a better job at just helping with some of that transition and handoff. So if there's a thing that we're going to enable or a desired business outcome or whatever the business justification is, making sure that, we're marketing that to the right leadership, showing how we're providing value and the things that we're trying to accomplish together.
We have less than a minute left. You kind of anticipated my last question, which is there a role for industry to help maintain the consistency of handoff to handoff to handoff?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the accountability piece of the equation, right? Like, if you're going to be accountable, I think that'll help you be a strategic partner and a trusted advisor. And when you have that level of relationship, the art of the possible and working together for the mission and not the sell provides a lot of value and brings a lot of those projects to fruition.
Chris Betts of Omnissa. We've spoken a lot on this program so far about the technology sea service leaders need to achieve the results they want. Both military and industry leaders, though, put people at the tops of their priority lists. One area where the Defense Department needs more people with more skills is cyber. One way they're doing that is with the Cyber Workforce Qualification Program they call Manual 8140. Matt Isnor is program lead for cyberspace workforce development at DoD. He says the department's running full speed ahead on implementation.
This year, we're focusing on the cybersecurity element, a lot of the work roles, getting the services and the stakeholders to kind of report their qualifications to us, see what the capabilities of our workforce are capable of doing right now. Next year will be the rest of the individuals or the elements inside of the DCWF, our IT workforce, our cyber operational workforce. But we're really kind of working with the stakeholders, making sure that they're reporting into their various systems and getting that information so we can start understanding where our workforce is, how many we have, and all the data around it.
How will that data help you understand? How will it inform the way that you move out on augmenting the workforce that you have or augmenting the skill set in the workforce that you have?
That's definitely a great question. And what we've been trying to articulate with 8140 is it's a total management system. It really gets into the readiness of the workforce. It gives a picture to our senior leaders, not only what are the qualifications, what are they capable of doing, where are their gaps, what are the training, where are the areas that we are short in the various, the fight against cyber in the environment. So we're trying to understand that, give the picture across the department, not only to our operational people, but also our senior leaders at the Pentagon, to make sure that they have that information and can make informed decisions and make forecasting decisions and really surge our people to make sure we're meeting the demand.
What's the specific data that people are collecting across the department that will help you make those decisions? What do you want to know about what each individual does and how they do it, and then broadly how that all fits together?
Yeah, so because we kind of base everything on 8140 off of the DCWF, we're looking at the knowledge and skills. What are they doing from a day-to-day basis? What are the training pathways? What are the things that they need to be able to do to get on net, do mission, do operations, and defend our networks So what we wanted to be able to do is establish a full training pathway, understand that capability, make sure we give them the availability of that training to make sure they're capable of doing it. Currently, right now, we're collecting a lot of things like HR stuff, time to hire, attrition rates, areas of those capability. But in the future, we really want to focus on the readiness, understand the capability, understand the people's day-to-day operations to make sure we better fit them with the right training pathways.
So you're getting an inventory, it sounds like, of what capabilities you currently have.
Yep.
Do you have a sense of what eventually you want the broad capability of the department to be from a cyber workforce perspective? Or will that shift over time as the threat landscape shifts, as technology shifts, as you move farther along with the Zero Trust Initiative and so on?
Yeah, so it's definitely one of those, as cyber changes every 3 months, you're
Right.
already out of OBE at that point. But we're constantly in communication with our operational units, understanding the skill sets, understanding what the demand signal, where are they getting a lot of their attacks, what are they getting from their adversaries. So just constant communication with that to be able to surge the next evolution. We are always being responsive to them, looking at them to understand and communicate with us so we can update the DCWF, so we can look at the work roles, make sure the knowledge and skills are in there, and making sure it's all covered.
What does the timeline look like for full implementation?
So we are currently in the beginning stages. 25 is the first evolution. 27 should be the full qualification. February 2027 is getting all of the stakeholders to kind of report on qualifications in all of the elements inside of the DCWF. We're currently also working on an evolution to kind of expand the DCWF, get into other technology areas like AI, data, software engineering, maybe Spectrum, to make sure that all of our technology talent is coming through the same pipeline and we're all communicating.
How will those different areas of specialty differ, if at all, from the way that you're working through the cyber workforce now? Will it just differ based on the capabilities and skills that they'll need to have, or will there be other things that are unique or peculiar to that particular area of expertise?
Yeah, so when we're going through the baseline foundations, we're understanding the capability of those specific work roles, elements, AI versus cybersecurity. But then we also allow the flexibility to the organizations. So each organization has a different mission, has a different focus. We want to be able to provide that availability to them to be able to kind of be flexible to kind of maneuver and make their special person at the end state. So as their mission develops, we are going to have to flex with them and start changing the kind of guidance as we go forward.
Do you need any authorities or anything in order to expand, to scale this into those other areas of specialty? Or can you do that based on what you already have?
So we're constantly working and collaborating with our other OSD partners. So our P&R individuals, some of our CDAO, R&E brethrens, collaborating to have a common thread, have a single source going out of the department. So we're all in lockstep to make sure that we're getting that common voiceover, the track to our stakeholders across the department. So when do we need other authorities? We always will take them. We want to be able to have it in policy. It helps direct some of the services and stakeholders to kind of come on board and start moving in that direction. But we're constantly working with them to make sure we get those up and running.
Matt Isnor of DoD. You've heard a lot of the guests on this show talk about transformations. It's a popular word to describe what an organization's trying to do to make itself work better. Jim Coyle is U.S. Public Sector Chief Technology Officer at Lookout. He tells me what he observes about transformations.
One of the things that I'm starting to see is commercialization has really kind of taken stride mobility as a great example, using mobile products as a way to get the workforce to be able to work anywhere, be able to really kind of complete their missions, right, wherever they may be. And I think the components really haven't fully embraced mobile overall. There's pockets of government that have, but there's still, I think, some legacy archaic architecture that still exists, both from a cloud perspective as well as even from a mobility standpoint. And I think if we start to strengthen some of these private-public partnerships, I think we can get the components to modernize relatively quickly.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think they haven't embraced that mobility that you just described? What's the holdup?
I think it really has to do with being able to be comfortable with the security of mobility. Mobile has really kind of come under the attack, especially over the last 10 years. It's now really starting to become the entry point into many organizations. We've seen groups like Octopus, Lapsus, as many others, where mobile is now kind of that entry point and holding the keys to the kingdom. It has multi-factor authentication capability. It's got the tokens that are getting, to the devices, and more importantly, you got to think most of us have email on our mobile devices. So if phishing in its various forms, whether it's phone calls or SMS, if they are starting to target mobile, well, how do you protect that? And I think that's where the struggle might be as far as the mobile is concerned. From a cloud perspective, I think it's still the components are struggling with identifying what data exists, classified, unclassified, what security controls are around those different data concepts, and then more importantly, who's got access to them.
Yeah. Is it as critical to know where the data is located? And I'm not even necessarily talking about the physical location, but all of those endpoints where that data may be accessed or may be currently accessed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just even the context of where is the data, but also what's going on with whatever element that data sits on. What's going on with it? Is it up to patch level? Is there, questionable activity happening on that environment? Is your antivirus going off, right? I think if we start taking a look at some of these contextual elements, from a security standpoint, that's valuable information. Am I all of a sudden logging in from Japan, but yet I usually log in from Texas? Raises a lot of questions.
Yeah. Do you see the organizations that you're talking to becoming more receptive to learning about what private sector, what commercial organizations are doing and trying to apply those where appropriate, or is that still not happening as much?
Again, I think it's happening in pockets. And we start to see elements of like the system integrators who are trying to bring in multiple vendors to help with these modernization elements. But again, it's not fully taken place. And I do think it has to do with just the fact of the comfortability of security of these new components.
Mm-hmm. What are you following trend-wise? What do you see in the next 6 months, year, 2 years that the people in this room, people at this conference, people in the sea services more broadly, and across the federal government should be watching?
AI, obviously, one of the biggest topics right now. Interestingly enough, I think data sovereignty around AI and what controls are in place, like what kind of information are you providing these various AI tools? Does it have a phone home ability? Is there, an ability to have a closed-off environment, right? That's definitely going to be a hot topic. But also figuring out how do I operationalize AI to where it really makes a difference. Yeah. There's a lot of vendors who are talking about AI, and it's fantastic because it's developing a lot of new innovation. But we still need to figure out how do I best operationalize it to where it's meaningful to my mission. That is where I think a lot of the groups are struggling today. Another trend that we're seeing, again, I mentioned this earlier, but mobile is being a primary target for threat actors going after. That's something that we're seeing increase significantly, especially even over the last year. And then on top of that, I think, again, following context of your endpoints, of your data, of the identity that people are utilizing as a login mechanism, whether it's device, whether it's username and password, whether it's a token, like a YubiKey, whatever that identity is, having the context, I think, also needs to be more as a priority in order to help safeguard not just national security, but all of these modernization efforts.
Jim Coyle of Lookout. In making these transformations you're hearing about on this program, government leaders tell me each one is different, but they also say they see common elements with the journeys their colleagues and peers are leading. Chris Elsons is Director of Public Sector Go-to-Market for Domino Data Lab. He tells me the common threads he sees in those transformations.
I would say over the last 2.5 years, we've seen a significant uptick in interest in adopting innovative solutions to solve problems. And this event in particular, focusing on digital modernization, but really a lot of that is emphasized around autonomy, AI, right? How do you acquire these solutions? How do you make them production ready? How do you scale them? And so I think the pattern that we've seen emerge and the track that we followed from going from prototype to a production agreement followed kind of a few key components. And so the first is trying to find prototypes that have high impact, that can get awareness across the broader organization, that will convince folks that this is something worth investing in and continuing to scale up to solve real world mission applications. And not just scoping a prototype and thinking, okay, you're going to define the exact right requirements up front, click through all these boxes, that equals success, and you're off to the races. Particularly with AI and autonomy, there's so many moving variables that you have to plan for iteration. And so that's something that our partners in AFCEA and NavWar have been really good about, keeping it an open-ended scoping for the prototype. And that allowed us the flexibility to get to a really good outcome working with the operators and the sailors. I think some of the other components, commercial industry is really good, I think, at off the shelf getting you 80, maybe even 90% of the way there. But the Navy is going to have very unique requirements that we just don't see on the commercial side, like working with acoustic sonar data is not something that many commercial enterprises are involved in. And so being planned to partner across a broader, diverse set of companies, both software providers and contractors who can do the dev work is really important. So coming in with that mindset and working to integrate at the outset and thinking about the kind of standards and protocols that you can implement. I think outside of that, always keeping an eye towards scale. And this is where I think vendors can be really helpful, and thinking about, okay, if we're successful here, where else across the Navy could this be useful? Start striking up those discussions and seeing where there are similarities, and then figuring out a path once you do get to an accessible contract and you're deployed in an accessible environment to rapidly hit the ground running.
You mentioned that there are a lot of technologies and so on that the services use that the commercial world doesn't use or doesn't use very much. But are there lessons to learn from what the commercial sector does use to apply maybe even to some of those technologies that are not commonly used in the commercial side?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. I was listening to a presentation this morning that is talking about the hybrid fleet, right? You're going to have manned vehicles alongside autonomous vehicles. And how do you think about working across both of those, which are, fundamentally different technologies and ways of operating? And so it draws a parallel. So one of the common challenges and objectives for our commercial customers right now is deploying agents, right? And how do you manage a workforce that involves agents and actual people on the same team? And one of the things that we've seen be successful there, and some of the more forward-thinking organizations within the military are also talking in this way, is really creating risk profiles around different use cases and applications, and identifying one where you can drive impact within an acceptable risk threshold. And by doing so, you can start to win hearts and minds, because I think there's a lot of opaqueness around the topic of autonomy and AI. There's a lot of fear that brings to bear. And so being able to demonstrate within an acceptable risk profile how you can take something into production, where its limitations are, how you use it, and seeing that as opposed to just trying to educate people from more of a theoretical standpoint, we've seen be highly successful in industry, and we're starting to see early successes in government as well.
Quick final thought. Given the proliferation of at least the discussion right now around autonomy and AI, how are you seeing those intersect with the digitalization, modernization efforts that the sea services are taking on?
It's a really good question. So a big problem set for the work that we're doing, particularly because we're bringing AI to bear, but you have autonomy software, you have different software developers that need to create capabilities, is how do you integrate these solutions? And so barring having a reference architecture that somebody creates, we're trying to iterate and create that with government, but doing it in enough of an open-ended way that we know we're not going to have the finished product at the outset, kind of in a similar vein to what we were discussing before. And then thinking about what kind of open standards we might be able to coalesce on. And so I think that's where the AI autonomy piece is fitting within the broader digital transformation, modernization efforts. And there's a lot of work to be done there, but I think people are starting to think in that direction, which is really promising.
Chris Elsons of Domino Data Lab. Artificial intelligence is pushing its way into the conversation about turbocharging the Defense Department's operational capabilities. One of the huge questions that the recent controversy about DeepSeek is driving is how your AI learned what it learned. Brendan Curley is Vice President of Public Sector Sales and Digital Media at Adobe. He explains why you should know who's trained your AI.
First of all, do you know what's fascinating to me about AI is that it's almost been 70 years since it really started. And that when you think of like the name John McCarthy, who was one of the original writers at Dartmouth University back in the 50s, and then it really sat on its shelf for the years leading up into the 2000s where we had the computing power. And now it's on everyone's mind, as you alluded to. I mean, you can't walk around this conference without somebody mentioning AI and where we are. Adobe, we think about it in a couple different ways. We talk about it being with accountability, responsibility, and transparency are the ways we think about it. So when you think about especially responsibility is an important thing to touch on is we're very interested in making sure that the results are accurate and that they're diverse and that they're inclusive and that it's so important that somebody's watching that. Let me bring that to life for you in a couple ways. We have a brand new tool called Firefly for our creative suite. And what it does is it allows people to create content using text. So I can type in using a prompt and let's say I want to build somebody climbing a mountain, and it will do it in real time for me. And what's great about that is we train our AI on our tools and on our data so that if you use a company or use an alternative that is scraping the internet, for example, you don't know where that content came from. With Adobe, you know exactly where it came from, and you know that there's no risk to using it. And that's really a key. On the document cloud side, it's very similar. Is you may have heard of the PDF. It's been around for 32 years, and it's been an amazing tool for people to use. AI now included with Acrobat is able to review the document only. And it doesn't train other than in that document, meaning it pulls data just from that one source. It's not going out to the internet. It's not going out and pulling from these other sources where the data becomes convoluted or it becomes dangerous or it becomes less accurate. So those two examples are really a key where Adobe is concerned in thinking about generative AI and how we create the data for our customers.
Talk about content creation, and there are a lot of folks using AI to do a lot of different things in that realm. What are the best practices that you're starting to see evolve around responsible content creation with AI?
Francis, it's a great question. You think about the audience for the government. It's us, right? A lot of us got into public service and working in the government so that we can make an impact and make a difference. And we want to enable our customers to have that impact. And so is the data trustworthy? So if I'm the CDC or if I'm the VA and I'm posting pictures, I want the audience to realize that it's true and it came from us and that the impact is real. And that part is critical to when I think about that. We've been working with a series of groups around content credentials. And so if I create a picture and I make an edit to it, I can put metadata into that so it tracks it. So if you think of, if you've ever you go to the grocery store and you pick out a product and you look at the ingredients, you can tell exactly what's in that product. The same thing with content moving forward is we want people to be able to say, hey, this picture was taken on this day, it was edited here, and here's where it is today. So you can see and make your own judgments on what is real and what isn't.
What is coming that the people in this room, the people across the federal government should get really excited about artificial intelligence?
Well, what's so exciting is the generative AI is going to allow them to really do their job. And that's what is, to me, is the best part about it is if I'm an analyst and I spend half of my day creating spreadsheets and worksheets and collecting data and trying to sort through data, I'm not analyzing it. I'm doing that work. And if I can get something to help me do that, it's going to change the way I do my job. It's going to create my satisfaction. I'm going to be more impactful. And I'm going to get more value to the government. That to me is a wow of what's coming, is really to take advantage of that and enable people to do what they do best.
What do you see agencies doing to make sure that they maximize that potential that is so striking?
Well, I think they're doing it, to be honest with you already, Francis. I feel like they're starting to just dip their toe and they're asking good questions, just like you're asking today. AI is here and it's all around us. How can I take advantage of that in a safe and responsible way? And that's what we're trying to do at Adobe.
Brendan Curley of Adobe. Sailors and Marines will connect online better than ever soon. The goal of the Navy's Sailor Edge Afloat and Ashore is to, quote, provide high-speed internet access aboard U.S. Navy ships by utilizing low-orbit satellites. Rob Walborski is chief engineer at Naval Information Warfare Systems Command. He calls C2 a, quote, remarkable transformation for the Navy.
It's basically taking advantage of what's happening in space because it's moving much, much faster than anybody could have ever imagined. Nobody would have ever imagined having the ability to get 1 gigabit beamed down to a ship in the middle of the ocean even 10 years ago that we have today. And everything that our sailors do now involves being on the network in one way or another. And a lot of those things were put on hold for the sailors while they were out at sea performing their mission. And it really had a significant impact on career advancement, morale, and their ability to do their day-to-day jobs. Not to mention some additional enhancements on being able to get better information in performing maintenance operations and medical services and banking services and training and all these other things. So C2 takes advantage of what we have in space today. Right now, it focuses on Starlink, but as other constellations go up, P-LEO constellations go up, it's going to be able to take advantage through different types of apertures on all those new constellations coming up and allow sailors to really be able to do their job while they're out at sea, and also to connect with their families and to stay in touch and to do all these things and in a very secure way.
You mentioned quality of life, and that was the first thing I thought of. If I'm deployed somewhere way out there, the ability to stay connected to my family back ashore is probably the most important quality of life element for those sailors and Marines that are forward deployed.
Yeah, I'd say it's a huge tool for retention too, because you have to know that people that are joining the Navy today are from that culture of being constantly connected.
Uh-huh.
And, it's like, welcome to the Navy. You're doing our nation's bidding. Leave your phones at home and
Right.
You're not going to talk to anybody for the next X number of months. Is not really would not really go over well. So let's be proactive about how we keep our sailors connected in a secure way, managing, the bandwidth and taking advantage of what's in space today to support the ability for sailors to continue to maintain kind of the quality of life they have either on or off.
And you mentioned that there's a huge professional value as well as a personal value. What's the rollout plan for this?
We have C2 on a couple of aircraft carriers now, and my commander has directed us to, as aggressively as we can, get this capability out to all of the aircraft carriers in the next year to 2 years. Beyond that, we're also looking at scaling it down, smaller sizes. We have a similar capability, but scaled down on a few destroyers. So we're looking at getting this out to everybody as fast as we possibly can, given the tremendous benefit that it's providing our sailors.
What are the things that you have to do between now and full deployment in order to be able to execute on that?
There's a number of factors associated with how do we connect them back to the backhaul? How do we maintain and stay at the highest level of cybersecurity on those networks? And how do we be able to maintain that relevant functionality, but maintain our OPSEC on our platforms is absolutely critical. So there's a lot of things that we have worked out, but we need to improve upon as we move forward. And we want to continue to evolve this capability and start taking advantage of other constellations as they go into orbit.
I read that this is just one piece of the technology and digital transformation that you're undertaking at NAVWAR. What are the other components of that, Rob?
We're working transformation, across the board and moving as fast as we can. I think we're looking at the architecture, the ecosystem, instead of the system by system, and informing programs as best we possibly can. So when they deliver their capabilities, it's integrated and complementary to all the other capabilities that are on the platform moving forward. Embracing digital engineering, MBSE, virtual twins, looking at the entire ecosystem from an architecture perspective so that we can more rapidly and with a high level of rigor provide that system of system engineering and turn these systems that we're bringing to this ship into as optimized capabilities the warfighter needs as we possibly can.
I think I've heard the term system of systems at this conference more than I have in maybe the last 2 years. What's behind that from an engineering perspective? Why is that kind of a, I don't want to say hot topic or buzzword, but why is that a theme that you think a lot of folks, you and your colleagues and peers, are emphasizing now?
Because each system by itself will provide a useful capability to the fleet and the warfighters. If you design your architecture and perform the system of system engineering to where these things complement each other, then it becomes a force multiplier in the capability you have. And it also facilitates itself to new functions and features that you never imagined you could have because of the fact that you're engineering at an ecosystem or system to system level and not just delivering a group of systems that meet just a single system set of requirements. So it's that force multiplier that you're going to get so much more from a security, from a functionality, from a capability, from a future growth, from how the ConOps is used and how the sailors and the warfighters use the systems. All those things get amplified and multiplied if you do this right moving forward.
Rob Walborski of NavWar. The Navy's C2 program's only one example of how it's trying to revamp the way it does business, but also the way it thinks. Navy leaders say that's the first step in the digital transformations you're learning about on this program. Peter Sigeli is DoD lead for Qualtrics. He says he sees one main key to success.
Whether modernization of, operational technologies that we see around us at this conference today, it's all really about the people and about the people building it, maintaining it, and using it, and really being able to hear from those folks to be able to build that into the process of delivering those solutions to the sailor and make the effect as great as possible on whatever solution that is. So I think that there's a really growing interest from the Navy and the Marine Corps to take in that feedback, take in what sailors, what Marines, what civilians are saying, and build that into the solutions to deliver, like I said, to make that the most effective. And I think there's a history in the DoD of some not always doing that, right? Of being a little slow, these are the requirements, we're going to build this. And I think I'm really seeing with industry support that changing and leaders being very determined to change that and to listen to their people and go make the best possible solutions for a sailor.
What are the steps that people are taking inside the military to do that are effective? And where is there still room to improve in getting that feedback from the end user to learn this is what we really need to make this do?
Right. I think what it can seem daunting to start that process, right? Where do we start listening? And what we always tell our customers is you can't compare anything if you've never taken any measurements. So just take a moment and measure, right? Whether that's usage metrics or more, we call the more operational data, or just asking a simple question, not overthinking it, not making it super difficult, but asking that first question, set a baseline for both that you can understand the solution that you're measuring, the modernization effort that you're measuring, but also understand what questions matter. What are people, is this interesting when we get responses to this? Is this data set useful for building out that next solution? And so I think, what we always tell people is to just start. I think building those into true programs like we see in industry, advanced market research and building that into every step of the development process, that takes time, but just measuring something and have something to compare it to has really been transformational that we've been able to see with our customers across the Navy and just have that data point to compare to in the future.
So that the data situation, how much of the challenge do you think the services are having with not having enough data? How much of a problem are they having with maybe having too much data, collecting too much and not being able to parse it well? And how much from having the wrong data or the wrong information from which to judge okay, the people are happy with what we have given them, or they're not happy with what we have given them, and how to readjust.
Right. And I think, so there's a million types of data. In my world, like we divide those into two kind of buckets. Operational data of like who did what, when, what's happening. The data, when we say big data, that's what we're thinking, right?
Uh-huh.
So much of that, right? Very distributed, lots of problems getting those into the right places. But then the experience data, asking what anyone thinks about anything, there's actually not that much, right? And so that's what I'm saying, get that like first measurement to start, because once you kind of get that ball rolling down the hill, then that little bit of experience data can really like enrich all that operational data that we're seeing and really bring those two things together and like make things make sense to the leaders.
Do you find that organizations, when they do that first cut, are scared because they think they're going to get lousy results? People won't like what we have?
Absolutely. I call it that they're worried that we're going to be the tattletale machine. So that's what I always tell people. And one of my favorite things about, I'm lucky enough to work across the DoD.
Yeah.
And what I've seen is actually the data that we get on that first run is actually better than leaders think it's going to be.
Interesting.
Because the whiners and complainers, just like anything in life, if you go on social media, you go on a review site, you're going to get the most negative people that are going to come up to the top, right? And that's what they're used to hearing. They hear it from, this data calling this, oh my God, this and that. But then actually like the neutral or slightly above neutral people, especially, the kind of like mostly satisfied, is actually usually the preponderance of the folks that you can improve their experience, but they're not there to be scary.
Uh-huh.
And so that's been a really amazing thing to see, is like putting that data in front of leaders and being like, it's not as bad as you think it is. Here's how we can actually go improve it. But like, we're not starting from this place over here. We're actually in a better spot than you thought we were.
Peter Sidgley of Qualtrics. Thanks for joining me on this Innovation in Government program presented by Carahsoft from West 2025. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch the show in its entirety on our website at fedgovtoday.com or the FedGov Today YouTube channel. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for watching. Good night.